As I said, your book is pretty broad, and we saw that there are several challenges to free will historically that have nothing to do with what I call the scientific problem of free will. But in our own day, the scientific emphasis is probably the one that people are most concerned about. But we looked at very briefly at the claim that the position of the stars and planets in the universe are what Nostradamus called secondary causes, and determine, our path in life. These are versions of fatalism. Not many of us today, probably nobody I've ever had, is a devout believer in the existence of the traditional Greek gods, right? I don't think I've had many believers in Apollo in my classes over the years, or Zeus. But we looked at the Greek concept of Moira, of fate, and how they believe that their gods determined a fate for them. And we saw that the point of view of a play like Oedipus Rex is that if the gods determine your fate, any choices you make are powerless to overcome what has been predetermined. Now, just for the sake of time, even though it's in your syllabus, we're skipping over the Judeo-Christian notion of divine predestination. There's a strain of Protestant Christianity called Calvinism that holds that everything for us is foreordained by God before the foundation of the universe, including our final destination, whether it be to heaven or to the other place. On the other hand, there was a significant reaction against that, going from Roman Catholicism through Episcopalianism and the Church of England through Wesleyan Methodism, and the views of Jacob Arminius that say we do have free choice, and the Calvinists are simply wrong. And while the theological problem of free will is interesting, I think in our own day, more people are affected by the views of those like neuroscientists, like judges, who hold to some form of scientific determinism. And that's what is emphasized more in this slide. So, free will, as we saw, is all right. Well, the bus is going to leave the station pretty soon for good. Like I say, I was going to go over it today. I was going to get these things graded, hand grade them, but I haven't had time. My taxes have been a nightmare this year. It's the first year I've had to figure Social Security income in as a worksheet. There's like 15 steps to figure out that line 14B of my tax form. Anyway, we talked about Leopold and Loeb, and you can use that as an extra credit thing, that link that I put on the announcement I gave yesterday. It's a documentary on the Leopold and Loeb case. And the reason we bring it in here is because Clarence Darrow assumed that determinism, and in this case what is called hard determinism, is true. And he tried to get the sentence of Leopold and Loeb commuted from the death penalty to a life sentence partly by absolving them of complete moral responsibility for what they did. You know, so Clarence Darrow would argue that Loeb and Leopold should not be considered responsible for their actions because their characters, including their desire to kill and plan out what they thought was the perfect murder. I remember when I was growing up, there were two juvenile delinquents who had already been to reform school. One of them lived a couple of doors down, and they were in, well, what you would call middle school now, what was junior high back then. And back then, if we wanted to show a video, well, there was no such thing as a video. If we wanted to show a film, we did so. Put your phones away, all of you. You know, I don't think any of you are taking notes on them. I don't know how many times I have to say that. At any rate, what we used way back then were 16 millimeter sound projectors, and they were expensive. And the junior high school I went to had some, and a dishonest teacher persuaded these two juvenile delinquents to break in to the school after hours and steal one of those movie projectors for him. And they might not have gotten caught, except for the fact that one of these guys, neither one was what you would call the sharpest knife in the drawer, happened to inadvertently drop his wallet at the crime scene, which they had no trouble tracing back to him, right? Leopold and Loeb did something similar. They wanted to plan the perfect murder. They were both came from very wealthy families, but families where basically there wasn't a lot of interaction with their parents. Their parents more or less dumped the kids off to governesses to raise them. And this was cited as a problem. Well, at any rate, because they were so wealthy, one of them, and I forget whether it was Leopold or Loeb, had a pair of prescription glasses where the frame was so unique because it was made by a high-end optometrist that it could be traced back to him. And he left those glasses at one of the areas where they committed the crime. And that's how they were caught. And Darrow wanted to get the jury out of the way, so he pled guilty. But what he tried to do was get them off the death penalty. And in part, he argued that because of their genes and their environment, Loeb, a childhood that was affectionate, like I said, dumped off to governesses, both of them. Leopold was your 98-pound weakling. He was successful in getting the judge to spare their lives and give them a life sentence. And you can look at that documentary, as I say, since we're meeting today, it's not an alternative assignment, but you can look at it as a 10-point extra credit assignment. So here's the question. Do we have two young men who made the free choice to kill young Bobby Franks? And so it's their free choices that made them into what they were. Okay, either put that on the desk or put it away. Or could it be causal factors, as Clarence Darrow said, the causes, the responsibility lies in back of them, not with them, in the causes that led up to their decision to plan and commit this murder. So is it in their genes, their genetic makeup, and their environment? And if so, are they genuinely responsible? And the point is, if this is true of Loeb and Leopold, that a combination of genes plus environment makes them make the decisions they're making, then, as this slide points out, aren't all our characters a combination of genes plus our environment? So if Darrow is right about Loeb and Leopold, doesn't that mean that what goes for them goes for us, and that we aren't responsible for our actions either? So this view is called hard determinism, and it holds to incompatibilism. That is, that the claim that all of our actions are determined by causal factors is incompatible with the claim that we have the kind of freedom of choice that would lead to moral responsibility. So this is what makes people worry about free will. And it's not just an abstract philosophical topic. It relates to moral and ultimately legal responsibility, but not just for bad things. Suppose somebody does something heroic. You know, they, under a hail of bullets, they go out and rescue a wounded soldier, and they're recommended for a medal. But if their genes plus their environment determine that no other choice was really possible for them other than the choice they actually made to run out into the hail of bullets and rescue the wounded soldier, their wounded comrade. If no other choice was possible for them, then why praise them for the choice they made? Your book is very good. It has a very good example. If I said to you all, I would like to compliment all of you on the way you came in here and all of you obeyed the law of gravity. I would like to compliment you on keeping your feet on the floor and not, going out of your seats, but staying in them during class instead of floating away. You'd look at me like I was from the moon if I complimented you for obeying the law of gravity. Well, the point is, because you say, well, what choice do I have, right? I mean, if you're a good basketball player, you might be able to jump up a few feet, or a good, football player and make a catch or dunk a basketball. And so you're defying gravity, but not for very long, right? And then come back down. And so, this says if we have no choice in any of this, why should we be praised or blamed for what we do, since what we do is the only choice that we had in these situations where we make choices? Why blame, praise, reward, punish someone if there's no such thing as responsibility? So how can we make sense of what seems to be what convinces you and I that we're free, right? I came in here and it was my choice. I mean, when I came in the morning, whether to get some coffee or not, you bought a particular brand of phone. But you say, well, okay, I was at the store and I was considering the Samsung model and I was considering this iPhone. And I thought long and hard and I chose the Samsung or I chose the iPhone. And all of us believe that even if we deliberate and make a choice, that kind of shows, the fact that we deliberated shows that we were really making a free choice. I chose the Samsung, but doggone it, I could have chose the iPhone if I'd wanted to. That's what we tell ourselves. But what do you think this view says? This view says the only choice that was open to me really was the choice I actually made. That, as one of my people in the other class got it right, I mean, basically, if I think I had another choice, in other words, I chose the Samsung, if I think I could have chosen the iPhone instead, that's an illusion for them. I'm kidding myself. If I chose the Samsung, that was the only choice that was really open to me. That's what this view says. So how can we make sense of deliberation? Deliberation is kind of an illusion. Now, one way of providing a counter-argument against the gene plus environment, argument is to say, well, what about the case of identical twins? Their genetic makeup is the same. That's why they're twins. And if they grew up in the same family, they're growing up in the same environment. And anybody have, or maybe you're part of a set of twins. A set of twins in your classes in school who seem to go different ways. I remember at the University of Virginia, we had Tiki and Rondi Barber. One of them was a star running back. The other was a corner. I said tight end in one of my... when people in the last class said, no, he was really a corner. He was defensive. In other words, we can show examples where sets of identical twins turned out leading very different lives. So you say, well, doesn't this indicate that not all of their choices were determined by genes plus environment, since these seem to have been the same? Now, you can get into the weeds a little more deeply with this whole example, but scientifically, the view that we see in Laplace and de Holbach in the reading in your text on page, I think, 444 through 447, emphasizes scientific determinism. That is, that every atom and molecule in the universe obeys fixed, unchanging scientific laws. And here we can call this physical determinism. A reason to be worried that this reply that seems to challenge genes plus environment isn't enough is, if we look at determinism in the physical sciences at the atomic level, then we seem to have a good case for determinism. And so what does it say? Well, let me back up for a second. If you remember a little bit of your physics from high school, you know that hot coffee, and it's already getting cold, what little is left in here, that a liquid is going to seek to equalize the temperature with its surrounding environment, right? So if this is a hot liquid, which it was, hot coffee, it's going to seek to lower its temperature to be room temperature. On the other hand, if we had a cold Coke, it would seek to do the opposite. The ice cubes would start melting. None of us is going to get it wrong if I say, this is hot coffee and we leave it here for a couple hours, what's going to happen to it? You're all going to say, well, yeah, that, even though that's insulated, it's going to get cold. In other words, we can predict what's going to happen to a container of hot coffee because we know that the laws of physics are going to work on it, and the coffee does not have a choice in the matter about whether it's going to seek room temperature, right? We say, wait a minute, though. You might be able to predict what's going on with that coffee, but when I leave this room, you can't predict what I'm going to do. You can't predict what choices I'm going to make this afternoon. So doesn't that show the fact that you can't predict what I'm going to do, but you can predict what this, doesn't that show that I'm making free choices and you don't know what those choices are? Well, here's what this view says. This view says, in principle, I could also predict everything you're going to do this afternoon if I had enough information and could work with the laws of science to calculate what you're going to do. Now, Murawski can't do that. But Laplace, who's mentioned in the introduction, a scientist who also held the hard determinism theory, imagines, and this is a few hundred years before supercomputers, right? Today would imagine a supercomputer being able to do this, that has a massive memory and is a lightning fast calculator, right? Isn't that the definition of what a supercomputer is and does? But he imagines a I forgot to pass that around. He imagines an entity that has the characteristics of a supercomputer. That has a massive memory, and a memory that's so massive that it can remember for any time the position of all the atoms and molecules in the universe, and whose calculating power is so great that according to the laws of nature, it can calculate the future position of any atom and molecule in the universe. And the claim is that the only reason we can't predict your behavior is the causes involved are much more complex, but an entity like Laplace's demon here could, in principle, predict everything you're going to do if determinism is true. So given the laws of physics and the position, speed, and direction and motion of every particle in the universe at some time, call it t, the demon could instantly calculate the position, speed, and direction of every particle in the universe at some time t plus n, where n could be 2 minutes from now, 2 hours from now, or 2 days or 2 years from now. Right? So hard determinism says the laws of nature are so rigid and inflexible that they govern everything in the universe at every point of time in the universe. So in principle, if all the causes working on us to determine our choices were known, we could in principle predict everything about our behavior the same way we can do about the coffee in that cup. So this is possible. In other words, predicting things this way then would only be possible if physical determinism were true. That is, if the laws of physics are that rigid. So Newton's laws are deterministic, and so is classical physics. And by the way, even though we're not going to look at indeterminism, quantum mechanics doesn't really give us an authentic way out, because it says that at the subatomic level, things aren't predictable because they're random. But we're not looking for random behavior. When we talk about free will, we're talking about intentionally caused behavior on the part of free agents. So, Laplace's demon then works not just for impersonal things like gas in a box or coffee in a cup, but would work with us as well. So in principle, Laplace's demon could predict, if the laws of nature are this deterministic, if hard determinism is true, that you'd sign up for this class, what grade you'll get, even though you don't know what grade you're going to get, Laplace's demon would know. It could predict what you're going to choose to wear tomorrow. Even if you're debating between two outfits, it knows what you're going to choose. Even things farther in the future, like what career you're going to go into, whether you'll marry and how many children you'll have, stuff like that. So do you see how rigid this view is? It says we're all just basically puppets on the string, and the string is the laws of nature. And even our belief that we have free will is unfreely determined in this view. And again, we saw that in the case of things like Leopold and Loeb, it poses serious problems for the claim that we have moral responsibility and also for legal responsibility. Now, these are some examples he uses that we're not going to worry about. But so for next